Hi everyone, I'm Celine from Blue Calla Patterns and welcome to the video for the Primula Satchel. I've made already 3 of these. These are just 2 of the satchels that I made. So I'm going to use one of them and just show you the various parts of the bag before we get started. So we have a flap here with a top carry handle. The top carry handle is optional, so if you don't want to add it, you don't have to. It has a tab closure at the bottom of the flap, and we're using a turn lock for the closure, but you can use a magnetic snap if you prefer. The installation is the same, whether you're using a snap or a turn lock. The only difference would be that you would install the one half of the snap on the underside piece here of the tab before you do the assembly of this little tab. So that would be the main difference. So on the back of the bag here, we have an exterior zipper pocket. It opens this way. And of course, there is the gusset and an adjustable crossbody strap that I've used 1.5 inch wide webbing to make. It's just a huge time saver. So if you open the bag, I've stuffed it with some batting. But there are 2 slip pockets, and I've added a piece of binding along the top edge just as a decorative accent. And there is another zipper pocket inside the bag as well. I use the same method of construction for the interior and the exterior zipper pockets just to make it easier. And this bag here, I did use waterproof canvas for my lining, which is a time saver because you don't need to interface it. However, in the instructions, I'm using cotton and I'm using a fusible woven interfacing with it. But whatever you choose to use, the assembly steps are the same. The only difference I did was for the facing piece, for the zipper pocket, I just used a piece of fusible woven interfacing as opposed to another piece of waterproof canvas just to reduce bulk in that area. You'll have hopefully read through the entire pattern before starting. And then I've printed out my pattern pieces, but I have made a couple of I've printed some pages twice, and I'll explain that shortly. So in terms of the supplies you need, aside from an exterior fabric, a contrast exterior fabric such as cork or vinyl, and your lining fabric, you're going to need some fusible woven interfacing, and I give you some options in the cutting chart for a sew-in stabilizer or a fusible stabilizer. So sew-in stabilizer, I use Peltex. You can use something similar. For a fusible stabilizer, I'm using either fusible fleece or Decaville Light. Either one of those will work, so just use whichever one you prefer. And then you also need a tiny bit of foam interfacing. Now, I wrote a yard, even though you don't really need that much because it depends on which brands you use. Some of them are very narrow on the bolt, and so in order to have a piece long enough for the gusset, you might need to buy a full yard. So hopefully you have some already in your stash that you can use. And if you don't have a piece long enough, because the gusset piece, it is quite long, you can zigzag stitch pieces together, or you can stick them together by fusing scraps of fusible woven interfacing to just join pieces together. So in terms of your notions and supplies, you will need 2 12-inch pieces of zipper tape. Each of them should have a pull on it. And you don't need much hardware for this bag. You need 1.5 inch adjustable slide two 1.5-inch rectangle rings, and you need your turn lock or an 18mm magnetic snap. If you're going to use a magnetic snap, make sure it's one of the thin, really strong ones so that your flap doesn't accidentally open once you're carrying heavy items inside. That's why I prefer to use a turn lock myself. It's just more secure and your flap won't accidentally open. And then the last thing you're going to need is a 6-inch craft stick. I'm using the extra wide. They're also called tongue depressors. They have many different names depending on where you're living. So this one is a 6-inch. We're actually going to cut it down so it's 5 inches. If you're using the narrower craft sticks, you might want to use 2. But one should just be fine as well. And then optional is if you want to use some rivets. I used rivets to secure the, on top of the stitching, to secure the flap handle to the flap of the bag. Other things that you might find handy is some double-sided tape or fabric glue, a fabric pen, and some fray check. So for the pattern pieces, you need to print out, obviously, at least one copy of all of the pattern pieces, and some of them are cut on the fold. Now, when you're using materials like thicker materials or stiffer materials, cutting on the fold doesn't always work. And personally, I like to do a lot of fussy cutting, so I printed 2 copies of any pattern piece that is cut on the fold, and I am going to be cutting them out and taping them together, so the fold lines will be taped together like this. So one pattern piece will be wrong side facing up, and then the other one will be right side up, so I know what the pattern piece is called in the cutting instructions. I'm going to do the same for the zipper pocket piece. I'm going to tape those 2 together so that it's no longer cut on the fold. Same with the flap piece. I cut out 2 pieces. And I'll show you how I tape my pieces together. And then the rest of them are just, they're not cut on the fold, I don't believe. Oh, the flap firm interfacing is also cut on the fold, so I printed 2 copies. So I'm just going to take one of them and show you how I like to tape my pieces together. You're going to need a pair of scissors and some Scotch tape to do this. Don't use your fabric scissors. Use a pair of paper scissors. These are my scissors that I use for cutting packing tape. So they're actually kind of gummy, but they will work fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this one out first, but I'm going to leave the paper here on the left side of the fold line. I'm going to leave that there because when I tape my pieces together, I prefer to overlap them. So I cut one out all the way around at the line, except for at the fold line. And then this second piece, I cut all the way around along the line. Okay, so once I have the 2 pieces cut out, then I am placing the fold lines one on top of the other. They're quite thin, so there's not much of an overlap there. And then we do have this extra section that is going to just make the area where we're taping them together. It's just going to make it stronger, because I find if you cut right at the line and then tape them together, the tape eventually ends up tearing away or splitting, and then you end up having to repair your pattern pieces all the time. I'm going to tape along both sides here. Okay, so now that's nice and sturdy. And I do the same thing for all of my folds, cut on the fold pieces. On the next page of the pattern, page 3, I go through the various parts of the bag, and you'll notice the names that I've given all the different parts coincide with the name of the pieces on the cutting chart. The cutting chart is found on the next page, on page 4. So when you're cutting your pieces, you can refer to the pictures and you can match the names, and that way there you know, especially for fabric selection, it's nice to know which piece you're cutting and where it's going to be on the final bag. Okay, so we're going to go through the cutting chart, and I'm going to show you all of the different pieces that you need to cut. Now, you can do this either by taking your main body pattern piece and going across like this, or starting with one material and cutting all the pieces like this. So I prefer to take my exterior fabric, for example, and then cutting all of the various pieces that I need from that fabric. And then I know I can put it away and I'm done with it. I will go just for this video. I'm going to go through by pattern piece. I think that'll be easier. It's also easier for me to organize them that way. So the first one in the chart is the main body pattern piece. So that's this pattern piece here. And as I mentioned, I print out 2 copies and tape them together at the fold line. And then you see here I have my little turn lock mark right here. So you're actually going to be cutting 2 different pieces on the chart. So you're going to be cutting the main body items as well as the slip pocket item in the chart. So first you start with the full pattern piece and you cut out all of your main body pieces. So this here will be my exterior fabric. It's an SX linen. You'll see that on the front and the back of the bag on the exterior. And then this fabric here is my lining fabric, and I cut 2 pieces of that. And for these 4 pieces, I have 4 pieces of matching fusible woven interfacing. And then from the same pattern piece, you'll notice at the bottom it says to fold the pattern piece at the slip pocket fold line and use the bottom portion to cut 2 lining fabric and 2 fusible woven interfacing. So here's the slip pocket fold line. You're folding the pattern piece, and then you're using this bottom section to cut out 2 more lining pieces. So there's 2 here, and 2 fusible woven interfacing, and that's going to be for my interior slip pockets. And that's all we're cutting with this piece here. Now, one thing I forgot as well is that you should be cutting a fusible stabilizer with this piece. And so you can use either fusible fleece or Decoville light. I don't have the pieces here, I forgot them, but I will be using 2 pieces of fusible fleece, and you'll be using the full pattern piece to cut those 2. Now the next pattern piece is the flap pattern piece. And with that, you're going to be cutting 1 exterior fabric. So that's going to be your flap focus. So this is going to be on the front of my flap, and it's a cotton canvas. I've decided to use my vinyl for the flap underside. This is also considered, this is actually under the contrast. This contrast column on the cutting chart, and that's going to be the underside of my flap. Now, had I used fabric for the 2, I would be cutting 2 fusible woven interfacing, but since only one of them is cotton fabric, I only cut out 1 piece of fusible woven interfacing. And then you also need a sew-in stabilizer. You could actually use a fusible stabilizer as well if you wish, so it's up to you. I decided to, this is the flat firm interfacing piece, which is the next one in the chart. I decided to cut out 1 piece of Peltex, and it's not fusible, it's sew-in, so once I've sewn the 2 flat pieces together, I'll be inserting that between the layers and then doing my top stitching. You're going to see that a little bit later on in the video. The next item on the chart is the zipper pocket. Again, that was a cut on the fold piece, but I printed out and taped together 2 of them so that I could cut out not on the fold. And I have 4 in my lining fabric. So I just chose 2 coordinating lining fabrics for the bag. So I cut out 4 pieces and then 4 pieces of fusible woven interfacing. The next one is the zipper facing piece. Now I've gone ahead, because I've used these pattern pieces previously, gone ahead and cut that out, but yours should just be a solid rectangle piece at this point. And you're going to cut out a zipper facing piece for your exterior of your bag. So I find it really good to match this piece to whatever you're using for the exterior main body pieces of your bag. And then I cut another one out of my lining fabric. So it just makes a nicer opening for the zipper pocket if you use a matching fabric to whatever you cut for the main body pieces. And then because these are fabric, I am using 2 pieces of fusible woven interfacing for them. Next is your top band. So I am using 2 pieces of vinyl for that. So I'm going to show you where that is on the bag, just as a reminder. So that's this piece here, and then when you open it up, this piece here. So that is your top band piece, and you find that also on the interior in the lining. So I cut out 2 pieces of my vinyl, and then 2 lining pieces, and then because these are cotton, you need some fusible woven interfacing. Now again, so these pieces are a little bit older, so the cut list is a little bit different. So if you're using, like me, if you're using a cork or a vinyl for your top band exterior pieces, you're going to need to cut some top band firm interfacing pieces. And, oh, here they are. Okay, so that's this little piece here. Now, if you're using fabric for your exterior, you're going to cut a fusible stabilizer. So you're going to cut fusible fleece or Decoville Light, and you'll see it's a bit smaller. So I'm using a sew-in, but I'm actually going to glue it to the wrong side. Some vinyls will melt if you use a fusible, so I just choose to play it safe, and I use a sew-in, which I glue to the wrong side, centered. So I'm actually going to be showing you that very shortly. So I'm going to put all of these away. So that is your top band and your top band firm interfacing pieces. For the gusset, that's this pattern piece here. You're going to cut 2 contrasts. So I'm using my same vinyl, and then 2 lining pieces. And then you're going to need fusible woven interfacing for the lining pieces. If you used fabric for the contrast, you're going to need to cut 2 additional fusible woven interfacing pieces. So the slip pocket I already showed you. I did that with the main body pattern piece. Now you're going to need some strap connectors. So I decided to use vinyl for the strap connectors, and I'll just use the webbing for the actual strap. So I'm using my vinyl, and the pieces are 3 inches wide by 4 inches high. If you're using fabric for these, you're going to need to cut some fusible woven interfacing and fuse that to the wrong side as well. You could also just use 4-inch pieces of 1.5-inch wide webbing. It's up to you. And then the optional piece, your flap handle, that is just cut to measurements. I am using the same vinyl, and it is 2 inches by 20 inches. Now, to reinforce the area under the handle, that's where the craft stick is going to be used. It's actually going to sit inside there, in between 2 layers of Peltex. So you're going to cut 2 pieces of handle firm interfacing. They are 8.5 inches by 2 inches, and we're going to trim this down to 5, and we're going to glue that in the middle, and then glue this over top. And it's going to make a little sandwich that is going to sit inside our flap. And what that does is so when you have items inside your bag and you try to carry it by the handle, if you don't have any structure here in this area of the flap, the bag will cave in here as you pick it up. By doing this, what I call the craft stick sandwich, that is going to make it stay straight here when you pick up the bag by the handle. Next is the turn lock tab. I am using my vinyl for this, so I've cut 2 pieces from that. If you're using fabric, you're going to also need to cut fusible woven interfacing and fuse that to the wrong side. You're also going to need a piece of turn lock tab firm interfacing, and that's a piece of Peltex or any other firm sew-in interfacing or stabilizer. And then we have our slip pocket binding. So that's just a little accent piece along the top edge of the slip pocket inside the bag. So that's this piece here. It's just a decorative piece. Just adds a little interest inside the bag. So that's this piece here, cut to measurements, 12 inches by 2 inches. No interfacing on this piece. It's not necessary. And then the last thing you're going to need is your adjustable strap. I am going to be using some webbing. And you can cut this as long as you want. I like to cut mine at 54 inches. I find that's a good length for me personally. And cut a little extra. So I'm going to be using this for my strap. And don't forget, if you're using webbing, that you should heat seal the ends, the cut ends, so that your strap doesn't fray at the ends. We're going to be folding it over anyways when we sew it to the hardware, but it's always good to be safe and melt those edges with a flame. Now for interfacing, the first thing you're going to do is fuse all of the woven interfacing to the wrong side of the matching fabric pieces. That'll be the first thing that you do. I'm going to do that off camera. Then you're going to take your gusset exterior pieces and you're going to place them right sides together. Okay, you place them right sides together and then you clip them together here along this straight edge. And then we're going to sew them together with our typical 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And make sure that you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, now that they're sewn together, we're going to top stitch. And you have 2 options. You can open the seam allowance and top stitch the seam allowance down along both sides of the main seam. Or I've seen some people just prefer to fold it over to one side and then top stitch only along the one side. It's up to you, whatever you prefer. Okay, so that's what it looks like sewn together, and I decided to open the seam allowance and top stitch along both sides. I like symmetry. So now that I have my assembled gusset, I can use that as a template to cut out the foam interfacing that I need. So this is quite big, so I'm hoping I can fit it all on screen so you can see it. So I'm just going to place this over top of my foam and then cut that out. Okay, so now you have a couple of options to attach the foam to the gusset. You can go ahead and just baste it together using a zigzag stitch all the way around, and using a zigzag stitch actually compresses the foam so it's not as bulky in the seams. Unfortunately, I don't have a zigzag machine anymore, so I can't do that. I sometimes just go ahead and baste it with a regular straight stitch. Or if I want to avoid any kind of bulky look in the seams, what I will do is I will trim the seam allowance off the piece of foam, and then I'll just use fabric glue and I will glue it to the wrong side of my vinyl, which is what I'm going to do in this pattern, but I'll do it off camera since it's a little bit long and boring to watch. Okay, so now I've glued the foam to the wrong side of my gusset exterior. Make sure that if you do this method that you don't use too much glue, otherwise it can show on the on the vinyl side. You can kind of see where you've glued if you put too much. So I'm going to let this dry, and I'm going to set it aside for now. So you're going to need your glue again, and what we're going to do is we're going to take our top band firm interfacing pieces and our top band exterior pieces, and we're going to do some gluing again. So you're gluing the top band firm interfacing to the wrong side of these top band pieces. Make sure that you're placing them correctly so there is an angled side to these. Okay, so these pieces as well will need to be set aside so that they can have a chance to dry. Now, I do tell you to glue the flat firm interfacing, but you don't have to. It's really up to you, and it depends also on what materials you're going to be using. So if you do want to glue it, though, you would glue it on so I have it interfaced to the top fabric, and I do prefer to fuse it to the underside piece. So if you want to do that, you can go ahead and just glue it centered. But I'm actually going to wait, and I'm going to just insert it in between the layers of the flap once I've sewn them together and just prior to top stitching. So we're going to hold off on that. Okay, for the next part, you're going to need your 2 main body exterior pieces, as well as the 2 pieces of fusible fleece that you cut out using the main body pattern piece. And with the pattern piece, now obviously I've used this before, you're going to go ahead and cut out the zipper pocket opening section from the pattern piece. And then you're going to take one of the fusible fleece pieces, move the rest of these things out of the way. I'm going to place this on top, and then you're going to cut out this section from only one piece of fusible fleece, not both of them, because we only have one exterior zipper pocket. So we're just cutting that out. Try not to cut the pattern piece like I just did. Okay, and then you can throw that away. And then you're going to fuse this to the wrong side of one of the pieces, like this. So you'll see there'll be an area here where there is no fusible fleece, and that's just going to make it less bulky where we're going to be sewing our zipper pocket. And then it's a full piece for the second one. Now this will be the front of your bag, and that will be on the back of your bag. Now we're going to create our craft stick sandwich. The first thing you're going to do is cut off 1 inch from your 6-inch craft stick. I'm just going to measure it and mark where I want to cut. So they say they're 6 inches, but I find them a little bit shorter than 6 inches. So make sure you have a section that's 5 inches then. And then cut that off. And you're going to need the glue again. And start by applying glue to the craft stick. The nozzle of my bottle is clogged with dried glue, so of course this is always a little bit painful. Okay, and then glue that center to one of the pieces. Now make sure that it is properly centered, because we don't want to, in a later step, sew through the wooden stick. I think that will result in some broken needles. Okay, and now we're going to apply a whole bunch of other glue, again to this side of the stick, but also all the way around these pieces here. Okay. Now normally I would give this some time to dry, but for the sake of the video I'm going to hurry it along a little bit. And just going to do a quick basting stitch all the way around with 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then you're going to need your flap piece, and it should be the flap, the piece of the front of your flap, what's going to be showing. I'm just going to make sure my interfacing is well fused before I go ahead and glue this on. So this is just a canvas with fusible woven interfacing. My ironing board has a little bit of a curve to it, so it makes it so that areas of the interfacing don't make proper contact with the fabric, which is highly annoying. So now we are going to need our ruler, and I'm going to, so this is the top edge and that's the bottom edge of my flap. Along the top edge, I'm going to draw a line that is 3/4 of the way down all the way across, like this. So this just this will disappear as soon as the iron touches the flap. And then I want to take this piece, and now we're going to glue this piece, make sure that it is centered. So use a ruler and check the distance here and here, make sure that it's identical on both sides. And again, more glue. And again, I just try to apply a nice, even thin coat, especially when you're gluing against fabric, because you can see like glue drops. I'm not sure how to explain it, but you can tell if you don't apply a thin layer, you can see it on the top of the flap. Especially if you're using a quilt weight cotton, you're going to see it. I think that's why for most of my sample bags I used vinyl for the front of my flap, because it's more forgiving to glue if it's not applied evenly. I'm really having trouble with this bottle. So note to self, for next video, grab a fresh bottle of glue, because this one is very naughty. Naughty glue. Okay, so now I'm just going to flip this over. And so before I press down, I'm just going to confirm the spacing. That's pretty good. And I'm actually going to put something heavy on here. So I'm going to put my ruler, and then I have this paperweight that I like to use. So I'm going to let that dry, especially I didn't give it the sandwich a chance to dry. I'm really just going to wait now, give everything a chance to dry, and then we're going to continue on to the exterior assembly of the bag.